The smartest person in the room wasn't the billionaire, and it wasn't the Nobel Prize winner either. The crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across the grand ballroom as hundreds of guests filled the annual Science and Innovation Gala. Expensive suits moved between white-clothed tables. Soft piano music floated through the air. At the center of it all sat Ethan Caldwell, one of the most successful tech billionaires in America. His name alone attracted attention. Investors wanted his approval. Entrepreneurs wanted his money. Reporters wanted his opinion. Tonight, however, even Ethan was not the star of the evening. That honor belonged to Dr. Jonathan Reeves, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist whose groundbreaking discoveries had changed the scientific world decades earlier. As the audience listened, captivated by every word, Dr. Reeves stood beside a large screen explaining a new theoretical model that had already sparked debate among leading researchers. Heads nodded. Phones recorded. Applause followed nearly every point he made. Ethan leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of red wine. Even he seemed impressed. Few people could command a room like Jonathan Reeves. Near the back of the ballroom, moving quietly between tables, was Nia Brooks. She wore a simple black server uniform. Most guests barely noticed her. To them, she was just another waitress making sure water glasses stayed full and dinner plates arrived on time. Nia preferred it that way. She moved calmly through the crowd, speaking little, drawing no attention to herself. But as Dr. Reeves continued his presentation, something caught her eye. For a brief moment, her hand paused over a water pitcher. Her gaze lifted toward the screen. One equation, one assumption, one detail. The applause faded into the background. Nia stared at the projection. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. Around her, guests continued chatting and smiling, unaware that she had noticed something unusual. Dr. Reeves confidently advanced to the next slide. More applause followed. Ethan took another sip of wine. Then Nia quietly stepped forward. Not toward the audience. Not toward the spotlight. Just one careful step. She hesitated. The room was listening to a Nobel Prize winner. Who would interrupt a man like that? Yet the question refused to leave her mind. Her fingers tightened slightly around the silver pitcher. Finally, in a voice so calm it almost disappeared beneath the music, she spoke. "Excuse me, Professor Reeves." The ballroom slowly fell silent. Nobody moved. The soft clinking of silverware stopped. Even the piano player seemed uncertain whether to continue. Dr. Jonathan Reeves stood beside the giant screen, one hand resting on the presentation remote. His eyes searched the ballroom until they found the source of the interruption. A waitress, standing quietly near table 14, holding a silver water pitcher. For a moment, nobody spoke. Ethan Caldwell lowered his wine glass and stared. Around him, executives, professors, donors, and journalists exchanged confused looks. Some appeared annoyed. Others looked amused. Dr. Reeves offered a polite smile. "Yes?" he asked. Nia Brooks swallowed carefully. Every eye in the room was suddenly on her. Yet her voice remained calm. "I think there may be a problem with the second assumption in your model." A few nervous laughs escaped from nearby tables. Someone whispered something that drew a smirk from another guest. Ethan noticed the reactions immediately. Most people had already decided she was wrong before hearing another word. Dr. Reeves remained surprisingly patient. "A problem?" he asked. Nia nodded. "Only if I understood the slide correctly." The Nobel Prize winner glanced toward the screen behind him. "Tell me what you see." The room grew even quieter. Nia looked up at the equation. She did not rush. She did not try to impress anyone. She simply pointed toward one section near the center of the model. The projection assumes stability across all variables after the third phase. But if the environmental inputs continue changing at the rate shown in your earlier data, that stability would not hold. Silence. Complete silence. Ethan felt himself leaning forward. Dr. Reeves blinked once. Then again. The polite smile faded. Not because he was offended. Because he was thinking. Deeply. Slowly, he turned back toward the screen. The remote clicked. One slide. Then another. then back again. His eyes moved across the equations. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. The confidence that had filled the ballroom only moments earlier suddenly felt less certain. Nia remained still. She was not challenging him. She was not arguing. She simply waited. Dr. Reeves studied the data for nearly 20 seconds. To everyone else, it felt much longer. Ethan watched carefully. Something had changed in the scientist's expression. Curiosity. Genuine curiosity. Finally, Dr. Reeves looked back at her. "What is your name?" he asked. "Nia Brooks." "And where did you learn enough physics to notice that?" Another wave of whispers swept across the room. Nia hesitated. "I read a lot." More laughter. Softer this time. But Dr. Reeves did not laugh. Not even slightly. He continued examining her face. Then he looked once more at the screen. Another click. Another slide appeared. "Interesting," he said quietly. Ethan noticed that the scientist was no longer addressing the audience. He was speaking directly to Nia. For the first time that evening, the most respected man in the ballroom seemed less interested in his presentation than in the waitress who had interrupted it. And somehow, Nia looked completely unconcerned by the attention. She simply held the pitcher at her side and waited for the next question. Nia expected the conversation to end there. Most people would have smiled politely, dismissed her comment, and returned to the program. Dr. Jonathan Reeves did not. He set the remote on the podium and took a slow step toward the edge of the stage. The ballroom watched in complete silence. "You said the stability would not hold," he said. "Why?" Nia glanced at the screen again. The answer came naturally. Because the environmental variables are not independent. They influence one another. Once the third phase begins, the changes accelerate instead of balancing out. Several guests frowned. Others looked confused. But Dr. Reeves remained focused. "And what happens after that?" Nia answered without hesitation. "The projection becomes overly optimistic." A murmur spread across the room. Ethan Caldwell felt his pulse quicken. He had attended hundreds of conferences, investment summits, and academic events. He had never seen anything like this. A waitress and a Nobel Prize winner discussing advanced scientific theory while a room full of experts listened. Dr. Reeves nodded slowly. "That is exactly the criticism my colleagues raised during the preliminary review." The room fell silent again. This time, the silence felt different. The smiles disappeared. The laughter vanished. People began looking at Nia with new eyes. Ethan noticed it immediately. Respect was replacing amusement. Dr. Reeves folded his arms. "Tell me something, Ms. Brooks. Did someone explain this model to you before tonight?" "No, sir." "Have you read my recent papers?" "A few of them." Another wave of whispers moved through the ballroom. Dr. Reeves seemed almost amused now. "Only a few?" Nia gave a small shrug. "I work long shifts." A few people laughed softly. Even Ethan found himself smiling. Not because she was trying to be funny, because she was completely sincere. There was no performance. No arrogance. No attempt to impress anyone. Dr. Reeves studied her carefully. For the first time that evening, he looked less like a celebrated scientist and more like a curious professor meeting a promising student. "What is your educational background?" he asked. Nia hesitated. The pause lasted only a second, but Ethan noticed it. "Nothing special," she said quietly. "Just an interest in learning." The answer sounded incomplete. Dr. Reeves seemed to think so too. Yet he did not press further. Instead, he returned to the screen and advanced several slides. Equations appeared. Graphs followed. The presentation had become something else entirely. Not a lecture. Conversation. "Then perhaps you can help me with another question," he said. The audience shifted forward in their seats. Nia remained standing beside table 14, still holding the silver pitcher. She looked more like a server than ever. Yet somehow she now held the attention of every billionaire, scientist, investor, and journalist in the room. Ethan could not take his eyes off her. The more attention she received, the less she seemed to care about it. And that puzzled him more than anything else. People spent fortunes chasing recognition. Nia Brooks looked as though she would be perfectly happy returning to refill water glasses. Dr. Reeves clicked to a new slide. A more complicated equation appeared. He looked directly at her. Let us see how far your interest in learning really goes. The new equation filled the massive screen. Symbols stretched across the projection like a foreign language to most of the audience. Several guests glanced at one another. A few professors in the front row narrowed their eyes. Dr. Jonathan Reeves stood beside the display, waiting patiently. Nia Brooks looked up. The ballroom disappeared around her. The crystal chandeliers, the expensive suits, the cameras. None of it mattered. Only the problem. Only the numbers. Ethan Caldwell watched her carefully. He expected hesitation. Anyone would hesitate. A Nobel Prize winner had just presented a challenge in front of hundreds of influential people. Yet Nia remained calm. Not confident. Not nervous. Simply focused. Her eyes moved from one side of the equation to the other. A few seconds passed. Then a few more. The room held its breath. Finally, she spoke. The model assumes the correction factor remains constant. Dr. Reeves nodded. It does. Nia tilted her head slightly. Only under stable observation conditions. Several scientists in the audience straightened in their chairs. Dr. Reeves did not respond immediately. Go on, he said. Nia pointed gently toward a section near the bottom of the display. If observational drift increases beyond the projected threshold, the correction factor becomes variable. The outcome changes. The room became perfectly still. Ethan looked toward the scientists seated near the stage. He noticed something unusual. Nobody was smiling anymore. Nobody appeared amused. They were listening. Really listening. Dr. Reeves studied the screen. Then he glanced at Nia. Then back at the equation. His expression grew thoughtful. That is an interesting observation. Nia lowered her hand. I could be wrong. The answer surprised Ethan. Most intelligent people he knew hated being wrong. Most powerful people hated it even more. Yet Nia seemed completely comfortable with uncertainty. She cared more about the truth than about winning. Dr. Reeves slowly walked back toward the podium. You are not wrong, he said quietly. A ripple moved through the ballroom. In fact, he continued, that exact issue delayed publication of this model by nearly 8 months. The audience erupted into whispers. Ethan felt a strange sensation. It was not shock anymore. It was curiosity. Who was this woman? Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. Dr. Reeves smiled faintly. You keep noticing the details most people miss. Nia looked down at the silver pitcher still resting in her hands. For the first time all evening, she seemed slightly uncomfortable. Attention had become impossible to avoid. Yet she never leaned into it. Never enjoyed it. Ethan found that more remarkable than her intelligence. Across the ballroom, guests had stopped discussing business deals and investment opportunities. They were discussing her. The waitress. The woman standing quietly beside table 14. The woman who somehow spoke to a Nobel Prize winner as an equal without ever acting superior. Dr. Reeves advanced to another slide. A more difficult one. Complex charts filled the screen. The kind of material that usually appeared only in academic conferences. He looked directly at Nia once more. This time there was no trace of skepticism in his voice. Only respect. I have one more question, he said, and I have a feeling you may know the answer before anyone else in this room does. The next slide looked even more intimidating than the last. Layers of charts, calculations, and projected outcomes filled the giant screen. Several guests immediately looked away. The information was too technical for most of the room. But Dr. Jonathan Reeves seemed interested in only one opinion. Nia's. This question has divided researchers for years, he said. There is still no complete agreement. The audience listened carefully. Ethan Caldwell noticed something unusual. Nobody was checking their phones anymore. Nobody was whispering about business deals. The entire ballroom had become focused on a conversation that should never have happened. A Nobel Prize winner. And a waitress. Dr. Reeves pointed toward one section of the chart. If the current assumptions fail, what alternative framework would you use? The question hung in the air. Several academics exchanged surprised glances. This was no longer a simple test. This was a serious scientific discussion. Nia studied the screen. Her eyes moved slowly across the data. Again, she did not rush. Again, she showed no desire to impress anyone. She simply thought. Ethan found himself watching her more closely than the presentation itself. There was something different about her concentration. It was quiet, disciplined, familiar. He had seen that look before, in brilliant engineers, in founders building companies from nothing, in people obsessed with understanding how the world worked. Finally, Nia answered, "I would not replace the framework." Dr. Reeves raised an eyebrow. Several guests looked confused. "You would not?" he asked. Nia shook her head. "I would adjust the assumptions instead." Silence. Then she continued. "The structure itself is strong. The problem is that it tries to simplify variables that are not naturally simple." A professor near the stage slowly nodded. Another scientist began taking notes. Ethan noticed both reactions immediately. Nia pointed gently toward the graph. "The uncertainty is not a weakness. It is part of the system. The model should account for that instead of eliminating it." Dr. Reeves stared at her for several seconds. Then something remarkable happened. He smiled. Not politely, not professionally, genuinely. The smile of someone discovering something unexpected. "That is exactly the conclusion my research team reached 3 months ago," he said. The ballroom erupted into astonished whispers. Ethan looked around. People who had ignored Nia an hour earlier were now staring at her, as though they had discovered a hidden treasure. Yet Nia herself seemed unaware of the impact she was having. Her attention remained on the screen, on the ideas, never on herself. Dr. Reeves stepped away from the podium. "You continue to arrive at conclusions that took teams of experts. Months to reach." Nia lowered her eyes slightly. "I have had time to think about these subjects." The answer sounded simple. Too simple. Ethan felt certain there was more to the story. Much more. Then a sudden movement near one of the side tables caught his attention. A leather notebook had slipped from a service cart and landed softly on the carpet. Nobody seemed to notice. Nobody except Ethan. The notebook belonged to Nia, and as he watched her quickly move toward it, he noticed something unusual peeking from between the pages. Equations, detailed calculations, scientific notes written in careful handwriting. For the first time that evening, Ethan realized that whatever secret Nia Brooks was hiding, it was far bigger than anyone in that ballroom imagined. The notebook disappeared into Nia Brooks's hands almost as quickly as it had fallen. Most people in the ballroom never noticed it. Ethan Caldwell did. From his table near the front, he had caught a brief glimpse of the pages before she closed the cover. Equations, research notes, diagrams, not the kind of things someone casually scribbled during lunch breaks. Nia tucked the notebook beneath the service cart and returned to her place beside table 14. If she felt embarrassed, she hid it well. Dr. Jonathan Reeves remained near the stage, still studying her with growing fascination. "You seem to have spent considerable time thinking about these problems," he said. Nia offered a small smile. "I enjoy learning." Once again, the answer sounded incomplete. The audience could feel it. There was a story behind those words, a story she was not sharing. Ethan found himself wondering why. People usually advertised their accomplishments, especially in rooms like this. Yet Nia did the opposite. She concealed hers. Dr. Reeves seemed to reach the same conclusion. Instead of asking another scientific question, he changed direction entirely. "What was your field?" The question caught several guests by surprise. Nia looked down for a moment. The silence stretched. Soft, uncomfortable, honest. Finally, she answered. "Astronomy." The room reacted instantly. Several people exchanged startled looks. Ethan sat forward. "Dr. Reeves nodded slowly, as if a missing puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. "I thought so," he said. Nia looked surprised. "You did. Your way of approaching uncertainty. He smiled. It feels familiar. The ballroom listened carefully. No one wanted to miss a word. Dr. Reeves folded his hands behind his back. Were you a student? Nia hesitated again. Then she shook her head. I was a doctoral candidate. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. A doctoral candidate, standing in a server's uniform, carrying a water pitcher, serving dinner at a charity gala. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Yet Nia's expression remained calm. She seemed almost uncomfortable discussing herself. Dr. Reeves, however, understood the significance immediately. Which university? He asked gently. Nia named one of the most respected research institutions in the country. This time, even the professors in attendance appeared stunned. Ethan looked around the room. The assumptions people had made about her were collapsing one by one. Dr. Reeves spoke softly. What happened? For the first time all evening, Nia did not answer right away. The lights reflected against the polished floor. The piano remained silent. Every person in the ballroom seemed to be waiting. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. My mother became sick. No drama, no self-pity, just 4 simple words. Yet they carried more weight than any speech given that evening. The treatments were expensive, she continued. My family needed help. Research had to wait. Ethan felt something shift inside him. He had spent years measuring success through numbers, growth charts, and financial reports. Yet standing before him was a woman who had walked away from a dream for someone she loved. Dr. Reeves lowered his gaze briefly, not out of sadness, out of respect. And for the first time that evening, the room stopped seeing Nia Brooks as a waitress who understood science. They began seeing her as a scientist whose journey had taken an unexpected path. The atmosphere in the ballroom had changed completely. The charity gala no longer felt like a formal event, felt like a classroom. A room full of accomplished people sat quietly, listening to a woman they had overlooked only an hour earlier. Nia Brooks stood beside the service cart, still dressed in the same black uniform, still holding herself with the same quiet dignity. Nothing about her appearance had changed. Yet everything about how people saw her had. Dr. Jonathan Reeves remained near the center of the stage. His eyes carried the unmistakable excitement of a lifelong researcher. He was no longer presenting a lecture. He was exploring an idea. There is one question, he said, turning toward the audience. A question that has troubled researchers for years. The giant screen behind him changed again. A new equation appeared. More complicated than anything shown that evening. Several professors immediately recognized it. Ethan Caldwell noticed their reactions. Furrowed brows, concentrated expressions, quiet concern. This was different. Dr. Reeves looked directly at the scientists seated near the front. I would like to hear your thoughts. One by one, respected experts offered possible answers. Some focused on the data. Others challenged the assumptions. A few proposed alternative approaches. Each answer was thoughtful. Each answer sounded reasonable. Yet none seemed to satisfy Dr. Reeves completely. Eventually, the room fell silent. Nobody volunteered another solution. The Nobel Prize winner folded his arms and stared at the equation. This is why the problem remains unresolved, he said quietly. Ethan glanced toward Nia. She had not spoken. Not once during the entire discussion. Her attention remained fixed on the screen. The same focused expression had returned. The expression of someone following every detail. Dr. Reeves noticed it too. A small smile appeared on his face. Ms. Brooks. Every head turned toward her. Nia seemed surprised. Sir, what do you think? A nervous laugh escaped from someone near the back of the room. Quickly disappeared. Nobody else was laughing anymore. Nia looked at the equation. Several seconds passed. Then she spoke. Slowly, carefully. I think everyone is trying to solve the wrong problem. The room froze. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Dr. Reeves tilted his head. Explain. Nia took a small breath. The equation assumes the outcome is the unknown variable. She pointed gently toward the display. But the outcome is not the mystery. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. The real unknown is the starting condition. The ballroom became perfectly silent. Several professors looked back toward the screen. One scientist suddenly sat upright. Another reached for a notebook. Nia continued. If the initial condition is incorrect, every prediction afterward becomes distorted, even when the mathematics is technically correct. Dr. Reeves stared at her, not blinking, not speaking. Ethan watched the reaction spread across the room. It moved from confusion to understanding, from understanding to astonishment. One professor whispered something under his breath. Another slowly shook his head in disbelief. Then Dr. Reeves looked back at the equation. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, the Nobel Prize winner smiled. The expression carried equal parts admiration and amazement. "Good heavens," he whispered. "That is exactly where the error is hiding." And for the second time that evening, an entire room full of brilliant people found themselves learning from the waitress they had never noticed before. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The equation remained frozen on the giant screen while hundreds of guests processed what they had just witnessed. Dr. Jonathan Reeves slowly walked back toward the display. His eyes moved across the symbols one more time. Then he let out a quiet laugh. Not the laugh of someone being challenged. The laugh of someone discovering a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. "Of course," he said softly. "Of course." The words echoed through the silent ballroom. Ethan Caldwell watched the Nobel Prize winner carefully. He had spent decades studying brilliant minds. He knew what genuine respect looked like. What he saw now was not courtesy. It was admiration. Dr. Reeves turned back toward Nia Brooks. "Do you realize how many research teams examined this problem?" Nia gave a small shake of her head. "No, sir. Some of the best scientists in the world." Another wave of whispers moved through the audience. Yet Nia's expression barely changed. Ethan found that remarkable. Most people would have been overwhelmed by the attention. She seemed focused only on the ideas themselves. Dr. Reeves smiled. "And you solved the central issue in less than 5 minutes." Nia lowered her eyes slightly. "You had already done most of the work." The answer drew several surprised smiles from around the room. Humility. Real humility. Not the kind people performed. The kind that came naturally. Ethan leaned back in his chair and studied her. The more he learned, the more confused he became. How many nights had she spent carrying trays while ideas like these filled her mind? How many customers had spoken to her without realizing who she truly was? Across the ballroom, the audience began applauding. It started with a few scattered claps. Then more joined. Then dozens. The sound grew steadily louder. Nia looked genuinely startled. The applause was not for a presentation. Not for a speech. It was for her. For the woman who had quietly stood among them all evening. Dr. Reeves remained silent while the applause continued. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped away from the stage. He walked directly toward table 14. The crowd parted slightly to give him room. Ethan watched every step. When the Nobel Prize winner reached Nia, he extended his hand. The ballroom instantly fell silent again. Nia looked surprised but accepted the gesture. Dr. Reeves smiled warmly. "Thank you." Just 2 words. Simple. Honest. Yet they carried enormous weight. Nia seemed unsure how to respond. "I only asked a question," she said softly. "No," Dr. Reeves replied. "You reminded all of us why questions matter." Ethan felt those words settle over the room. Many guests lowered their eyes. Others nodded quietly. The lesson was becoming impossible to ignore. Intelligence did not always arrive with titles. Wisdom did not always stand behind podiums. Sometimes it stood beside a service cart holding a silver pitcher. As the applause slowly returned, Ethan noticed something else. Nia's notebook remained tucked beneath the cart. Hidden. Almost forgotten. Yet he knew now that those pages contained far more than notes. They contained years of thought. Years of sacrifice. Years of unfinished dreams. And for the first time that evening, Ethan found himself wondering whether those dreams were truly unfinished at all. The applause eventually faded, but the feeling in the room remained. Something important had happened that night. Something larger than science. Something larger than status. Dr. Jonathan Reeves returned to the stage and looked across the ballroom. His presentation slides were still visible behind him, yet nobody seemed interested in them anymore. The audience had found a different lesson. Ethan Caldwell glanced toward Nia Brooks. She was already reaching for a water glass that needed refilling. Already returning to work. The simplicity of that gesture stayed with him. Most people spent their lives trying to be noticed. Nia seemed perfectly comfortable being overlooked. Dr. Reeves adjusted the microphone. "Tonight," he said, "I was reminded of something every scientist should remember." The room grew quiet once more. Knowledge does not belong to titles. It does not belong to institutions. And it certainly does not belong to people with the loudest voices. Several guests nodded. Others looked down thoughtfully. Dr. Reeves smiled toward Nia. Curiosity can live anywhere. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the audience rose to its feet. Not because anyone asked them to. Not because protocol required it. They stood because respect demanded it. Ethan stood as well. Slowly. Thoughtfully. His eyes never left Nia. She looked genuinely uncomfortable with the attention, yet grateful for the kindness behind it. The standing ovation lasted nearly a full minute. When it finally ended, guests began returning to their conversations. Yet the conversations sounded different now. More thoughtful. More human. Ethan waited until the crowd settled before walking toward table 14. Nia was collecting empty glasses when he arrived. "You handled that remarkably well," he said. Nia offered a polite smile. "I was just lucky enough to notice something." Ethan almost laughed. Earlier that evening he might have believed that answer. Not anymore. "Ido." Not think luck had much to do with it. Nia looked down briefly, then returned her attention to her work. The response told him everything. She did not need validation. She did not need praise. Her worth had never depended on the room's opinion. As Ethan stepped away, he glanced once more at the notebook beneath the service cart. He understood now that brilliance had been sitting quietly among them all evening. The only thing that changed was that people finally took the time to see it. Above them, the chandeliers continued to glow. The music returned. The gala moved forward. Yet many would remember that night for one simple reason. A room full of accomplished people learned that wisdom is easy to miss when you judge someone by a uniform instead of a mind. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most important thing to say.